We spend so much of our lives searching for meaning, right? We're always looking for that one right answer, the thing that's going to explain everything. But what if that search itself is the real problem? That's the pretty radical question at the heart of Julia Kristeva's essay, Psychoanalysis and the Polis. And today, we're going to unpack her answer.
So Kristeva kicks things off with this really provocative idea. We are all constantly trying to interpret the world around us, trying to find the answer, the final explanation. But what if that very impulse, that almost obsessive need for a single solid meaning, is actually where all the trouble begins?
All right, so here's our game plan for today. We'll start with our built-in need for meaning. Then we'll look at how politics can twist that need into a kind of weapon. After that, we'll explore psychoanalysis as a potential counterweight. We're also going to dive into a pretty disturbing case study before we land on what Kristeva calls a new ethics of uncertainty.
Okay, let's dive right in with the quest for a meaning. We all do this every single day. We see something and our brain immediately tries to figure out what it means. But where does this deep, almost primal need to explain and interpret everything actually come from?
Well, Kristeva traces this way back to the ancient Stoics. For them, interpretation was pretty simple. It was just making a connection. You see a sign, like, a dark cloud, and you connect it to a meaning. It's probably going to rain. It's this really fundamental way we make sense of reality. But here is the absolute key. This is not just some intellectual game we're playing. Kristeva argues that our drive to interpret is really all about self-reassurance. By putting a meaning onto the world, we create a sense of stability. And in doing that, we kind of confirm our own identity, our own place in it. And right here is where Kristeva shows us a major fork in the road. She says there are two totally different ways we can go on this quest for meaning. On one side, you've got political interpretation, which is always looking for that one final, all-encompassing answer. And on the other side, you've got the psychoanalytic approach, which does the complete opposite. It actually dissolves certainty and loves to just keep asking more questions. So let's walk down that first path for a minute, the political one. Because according to Kristeva, this is where our natural desire for meaning can get twisted into something pretty dangerous. The demand for one final absolute answer. She calls political interpretation the apogee, or the absolute peak of this obsessive hunt for the meaning. And it makes sense, right? A political ideology's goal is usually to give you a single, unchallengeable story that explains everything: history, society, you. It wants to be the last word. And the stakes here? They are incredibly high. Kristeva argues that this deep craving for a single, all-encompassing answer is the fertile ground where totalitarian systems like fascism and Stalinism can really take root. When an entire society is desperate for one ultimate meaning, it becomes so vulnerable to any ideology that promises to deliver it. Now, to get our heads around this psychologically, Kristeva brings in the idea of delirium. She defines it as that state where your personal desires get so tangled up with your knowledge that your interpretation just becomes a fixed reality, no matter what the facts say. It's that moment when wanting something to be true completely smothers the process of actually knowing what's true. And she even pulls in Freud to back this up. He argued that a patient's delusions aren't just random craziness. They're actually distorted attempts at interpretation. The mind is desperately trying to build a story, even if it's a false one, to explain its own pain and, in a really twisted way, try to cure itself. So if that political path leads to a dangerous kind of delirium, what's the alternative? Well, this brings us to psychoanalysis, which Kristeva presents as a really powerful counterweight to all of this. Kristeva calls psychoanalysis a counterweight and an antidote, and its whole purpose isn't to give you a better final answer. Nope. Its purpose is to dissolve the very need for one in the first place. It challenges the whole idea that a single, ultimate meaning is even possible or a good thing. And this is the fundamental difference. Psychoanalysis doesn't try to explain away everything. Instead, it actually makes room for what Kristeva calls the unnameable. It accepts that at the very center of any interpretation, there's this knot that can't be untied, a kind of void. Delirium rushes in to fill that void with a simple answer. Psychoanalysis has the courage to just sit with it, to acknowledge it as just part of being human. To make all this a bit more concrete, Kristeva gives us a really powerful and frankly disturbing case study: the brilliant, yet infamous, French writer Louis-Ferdinand Céline. Céline was an absolute master of language. He famously said his goal wasn't about ideas, but all about style, about literally breaking down language to get at something deeper, an emotion that existed before words could even describe it. His writing was this deep interpretation of that raw pre-language reality. That unnameable void that Céline's style was trying to touch, well, that's what Kristeva calls the abject. Think of it as everything we have to reject just to become a self. All the primal, messy, sometimes horrifying chaos that exists before we have neat categories for things. It's the part of existence that really threatens our identity. Céline's writing brilliantly explored this abject space. But what happens when that artistic exploration, that interpretation of the void, hardens into a fixed and hateful political worldview? According to Kristeva's analysis, that's exactly what happened. Céline took everything that was abstractly horrible and threatening about the abject and projected it all onto one single, concrete group of people. With the rise of Hitlerism, Jewish people became the target for his venomous anti-Semitism. So after all that, what are we supposed to take away from this? How do we interpret the world without falling into that trap of a totalizing, dangerous delirium? Kristeva suggests that this psychoanalytic way of looking at things actually offers us a new kind of ethics. But it's not a list of do's and don'ts. It's more like a way of thinking, a continuous practice of holding complex, even contradictory ideas in your mind all at once. So this new kind of interpreter, they accept that meaning is never going to be final. They learn to move between their own desire for an answer and a kind of critical neutrality. But most importantly, they get comfortable with not knowing. And they build their ethical strength from that uncertainty, not in spite of it. And at the end of the day, this is why it all matters so much. Kristeva argues that true liberty isn't some destination. It's not found in having the right answer. It's a practice. It's a mental space that we have to constantly defend from the temptation of a single totalitarian meaning on one side and the pull of our own personal delirium on the other. So we're left with this final thought. In a world that is constantly pushing us to pick a side, to find a definitive explanation, maybe the most radical, the most freeing thing we can do is to resist that impulse. Perhaps real freedom isn't found in finding the final answer, but in strengthening our ability to live thoughtfully and ethically with the questions.